Welcome to The Girlfriend God, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine, bringing you an equal mix of academic research and emotional spiritual experience. Please rate and review on your podcast streaming platform. Leave a comment on YouTube. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Let's get in the flow. Welcome to The Girlfriend God. Today, I am happy to welcome Kimrâh. It's Kimrâh, right?
Yep, Kimrâh.
Okay. Kimrâh Minuty, is that right? I probably should have gotten that out of the way beforehand, but
no, you did great. You're like, I can read. I got this.
Kimrâh is an intuitive ascension coach, a certified life coach, a Reiki master, a spiritual consultant, and an author, an expert shadow healer, and she works by coaching clients to taproot their soul by transforming their lives holistically through addressing gut, heart, and mind issues that are keeping them from living their best lives. She's also the host of a practical spirituality podcast called Gaia Soars and the author of an inspirational poetry book called Lighten Up, Phoenix, Keep Rising, which is available on Amazon. So, Kimrâh, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You already know this, but just for our listeners, so I reached out to you and asked you if you wanted to come on the show because I discovered your podcast, and I don't remember what the title of the episode was, but you were out and it was very windy. You were like in the woods somewhere and it was very windy, but like the first thing you said, you were like, I just want to talk about the goddess and how much I fucking love the goddess. And she means everything to me. And I was like, oh my God, that's what I talk about. I need to talk to this woman. So here you are. Here you are.
Yay. And I'm so grateful, honestly, that I can be in a space where I can say that at this point in time without getting immediately stoned. Yes. Hashtag we're winning, right? And I have been on a social media spiritual journey since about 2019, coming out of like the spiritual broom closet, putting my face back, changing my brand, like expanding my business, getting certified, doing all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And in that process, the goddess has kind of been on the back burner, and not intentionally, but just the world has been making more space for her. Right.
Right.
And finally, I want to say, God, it's only been like 5 months, maybe longer, maybe like 6 months. In the last 6 months, my spirit guides had me change all of my taglines. They're like, it has to say in service to the goddess. You have to change your logo. I just changed my logo. They're doing the final touches on it. And it also says in service to the goddess. My nickname has been goddess for years. And in fact, when I send people airdrop things with my iPhone, my phone has been named goddess for like 7 years. But whenever I airdrop things to you, it says, you want to accept these photos from the goddess?
Yes, please.
Clearly, we'll take it, right? And so inadvertently, it's become a part of every aspect of my life.
Right.
Without being a disempowering aspect of my life.
Yes.
Can I do things without the goddess? Absolutely. And will I suffer by doing them without her? No. But do I prefer to have her in every deal, like every dealing in every job or thought that I have? Yes, I would prefer that, because then I know I don't have to redo that step. I know that it wasn't me reacting from trauma and bullshit and issues. Right. And I know that whatever it is that I'm doing has a better longevity than if I'm in a reactive, traumatic, ungrounded, unconnected state. Right. So I know you had said to me that briefly an email that, did you think people could do shadow work without the goddess in it? And the answer is
Right.
absolutely 1000% they can. They absolutely can. But what I have found is that what I have found for me personally is that you're going to do shadow work no matter what. If you want to continue on your spiritual path, no matter who it is that you
If
ascribe to,
girl, if you don't do shadow work will do
will do
you.
you. Thank you. We agree on this statement, right? So
Yeah.
shadow work will do you, and it will do you in the most painful way.
Yeah.
Now, being in service to the goddess has not been pain free in any way, shape, or form.
I hear that. I hear that.
It's,
So
it's
let's so uh let's talk about just for the benefit of our listeners, what is your definition of shadow work? And do you know, I should have looked this up before we recorded this episode, but I did not. Like when that phrase kind of fell into popular culture, because that phrase has been around for a long time, but I think a lot of times people don't really understand what it means. Like you could be casual about it, right? And say that going to therapy is shadow work or doing inner child work is shadow work
so
or
listen,
yeah,
all of that is shadow work because
yeah.
at the end of the day, shadow work for me, the way that I define it, and Carl
Mhm.
Jung is the first person who coined the phrase.
That's what I thought.
And I have a bachelor's in psychology, so this has been in my blood for the longest. I started reading an abnormal psych book when I was 9 years old because I was like, "What the fuck is wrong with people?" I was like, "There gotta be something." So I picked up a book. My parents told me you could find answers in books, so I picked up a book. Right, so that's what I did, and it was shadow work. I
Hmm.
was like, "Oh,"
Hmm.
and so basically, to me, and I have a shadow work course on my website. It's a basic
Hmm.
shadow work course. It means that you are now taking the time to scrutinize your hurts, all of them, your
Right.
traumas, your micro and macro, the things that weren't given to you, inner child for parenting wise, your
Hmm.
relationships, your relationships with money, with yourself, with food, with your family, your relationships, your job. That's shadow work because you have to dissect all of these pieces of self and
Right.
then you have to integrate them. Okay.
Right.
And when you're not integrated, you'll see that in people's lives. They're fragmented, they're scattered, shit's all
Right.
over the
Right.
place. Things happen to them and they just react to them. So that is what I call being ungrounded and running from your shadow.
Right.
Because when you face your shadow, you'll find so much. Like I always say, you'll find all the gold in your life in your shadow.
Right. And by the
It's
way, I forgot to say in your little introduction, all the social media links that you sent me and where to find you online and where to buy your book, those will all be in the show notes when the episode goes live. So it is all there. I just didn't
it
want to
is
read through.
all.
I just didn't want to read all the blah blah blah.com, blah blah blah.com,
I
blah
have
blah
so many
blah.com.
social media links.
I
Like, girl,
know.
bye. Look, people go to www.kimrahminuty.com and click the links. Okay, cool.
Right, right.
Or find me on TikTok. That'll be faster because that's
Right,
mostly
right,
where I
right, right.
am.
So,
Yeah.
but anyway, so what you just said, so I remember, so I'm a big Marianne Williamson fan, and I remember listening to her, that whole speech that she's famous for, right? Like we fear our light more than we fear our darkness, we fear our success more than we fear our failure. And the first
Correct.
time I heard her talk about that, she said, we are so afraid to go in there and go down there because we think it's dark and it's scary, but really all that is down there is light. All
Literally
that's down there is
that.
light.
Because once you start to let me rewind that statement. The thing that people don't realize is that your mind is like a knife, right? So it chops
Mhm.
things up and it only has that ability. It has the ability to dissect and chop things. Your heart has the ability to bring meaning and put things together and make things whole again.
Right.
And so when you are just letting your mind run rampant,
Hmm.
you're making mountains out of molehills. So
Right.
your traumas get exponentially bigger
Right.
the more you cover your eyes from them.
Right.
You've already been through the worst part of it. You survived
Right.
the trauma. So
Right.
why can't you look at it?
Right.
You have to, at some point, at least at a minimum, acknowledge that some shit happened to you that is not
Right.
palatable and that it's affected your forward progress. And then you have to go, okay, what can I do about
Well, and I think the other thing is that for me, in my experience, a lot of the shadow work that I've done has been about looking at things about myself that I don't like.
it? Correct.
Because in order to do that, first I have to admit that I even have those things, right? And who wants to do that? Who
Well,
wants
yeah,
to deflate
who
their
wants
ego and have a little humility and say, you know what? I have some things that I could probably work on. I could
listen,
be a better person. I could, you know.
I learned the hard way because I'm extremely hard-headed and difficult to like I'm stubborn, right? So
Yeah.
I learned that if I didn't start looking at it, the universe would just slap me with it in the most
Yep.
fucked up.
That's that
So
whole if what we resist persists.
multiplies and
Bam.
persists. Right. So once I started catching on to that pattern, and mind you,
Mhm.
I'm 41, I'll be 42 this year. I've only been actively deconstructing Christianity, my shadow, and all of this stuff for 11 years now. Before that, I was just like everybody else, even though I was highly sensitive, even though I already worked with like Wiccan and pagan, and I was a priestess. I was initiated into the priestesshood of the goddess Bastet in 2005.
Mhm.
Like I'd been working on all these things, but my life was in shambles.
Mhm.
And I'd been in therapy. Life was still in shambles. I
Mhm.
was like, what's going on? I had all of these mental health issues. Life is still in shambles. And I'm like, where is this coming from?
Right.
So finally, I was like, I'm tired of living like
Mhm.
this. This is not living. I'm always miserable. I'm always around people who take advantage of me. I seem to be a sin eater for others, and
Mhm.
I don't know why. Like
Mhm.
I was literally taking on people's health issues, their mental issues, their financial issues. And I was like, why am I the receptacle for all this bullshit?
Right.
Why? Why? And through wanting to understand that aspect of my life,
Mhm.
I was then able to start going down the rabbit hole of stripping away the traumas and
Right.
putting back in boundaries, right? So it's a
Right.
two-pronged process. You don't just do shadow work, you do shadow work and you gain fucking boundaries. Okay?
Right. Right.
Period. Because the
Right.
majority of the spiritualists that I have met are people who were never taught boundaries because they're mostly empaths who were abused by narcissists. Like
Mhm.
that seems to be the bulk of the spiritualists that I meet.
Right.
And
Right.
they're also old school souls who are expecting a village to take care of them, but we have no village for our services anymore. And
Right.
so you have to get good with money,
Right.
which that's
Mhm.
not a lot of spiritualists. That's not a lot
Right.
of
Right.
right, and that comes from an old concept. And so you have to break out of these different like societal norms that were placed on you, and that's what the
Mhm.
spiritual awakening is, right? Like I'm an ascension coach. The awakening is stripping back what society has told you you should do, who you should
Right.
be, what you should like
Right.
want, and then actually getting back to the root cause of yourself and finding out what your soul wants, what you're excited about, what you love,
Right.
what your purpose is, and how you're here to help. Once you get back to that, like I call that getting back to center. Once you get back to center, and then you ground your intentions into the will of the goddess or whoever you choose to practice under,
Right.
things will drastically change in your life, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
So, so back to our original topic. Yes, I believe what I said to you was I don't think successful, for lack of a better term, shadow work is possible without the goddess. And you said, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that. So let's talk about that. So
right, so
for
go ahead.
me, I it's so funny because Christians find out that I'm not a Christian and they're like, so you're not religious? And I'm like, no, I am actually very deeply religious. I'm just
I say
not your
spiritual.
religion. You know what I mean? And I do say spiritual, but
Yeah,
I say I'm religious because I am very devout and I am very devoted and I am very disciplined
correct.
in my practice. Um, and I more and more I practice my own life,
Hmm.
but the more gratitude I have, the better I am. And so from there, I get to this place of I really have nothing without her. She is in everything. She is in everything I am. She is in everything I do. She is in everything I will do. She's in every life I've ever had. She's in everything I've ever done. She's in all the people that are in my life. You know what I mean?
Agreed.
So, and the shadow work that I have done
Hmm.
has taken me to the darkest places I have ever been. And I would not have been able to come back from those places without her. Like I needed her as my guide to those dark places, right? Because I mean, even you're talking about, coming to the party late, right? I just turned 50 this past year. And I only started real I mean, I've been on a goddess path like my whole life, right?
Right.
I didn't always know that. And like most people, I've been through a lot of different um iterations of that, right? Like I've done the whole Wicca thing and
Same.
I've I've declared myself a witch. I don't really practice anymore, but if somebody asked me, "Are you a witch?" I would still claim that title because I've done that kind of work.
Correct.
You know what I
Same.
mean? And I'm a trained past life regression hypnotist and
Nice.
and I went through the keeping her keys training to become a dedicant of Hecate, and it was
Hmm.
actually Hecate that I worked with deeply
I love
to
her.
in the cave. I was in the cave,
If you're gonna do some deep
literally,
shadow work, if you're
literally.
gonna do so, you're gonna see Hecate, you're gonna see Lilith, you're gonna
Yes,
those are your goddesses for that type of
right.
thing, right?
And for me, and I also one of the benefits of living in Pittsburgh is that because we were close to a city,
Hmm.
there was a lot more openness about spirituality. So I actually had the opportunity to work with um, a shaman who was like, like the real deal, like it was in his Native American bloodline,
Nice.
and I had never had the opportunity or the means to do that before. So but in retrospect, I think all of these things, right? And then, I went through the whole neo-pagan phase and I tried to be a polytheist. And finally, I was just like, you know what? It's just not my jam. It's just not. And worshiping gods, male deities, also just not my jam.
Bunch
You
of
know what I mean? My whole process has been, like you talked about, this coming home to myself and realizing, really becoming true to what it is I believe and what it is I put my faith in and my
Mhm.
trust in. And that is her. And it's always been her, regardless
Yeah.
of what guise it took on at any given point in time. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think I would have survived my own shadow work without her.
No, that's a valid point. No, that's totally valid. That's totally valid. And so the reason that I said I can't completely agree with you on that is
Mhm.
because everybody, I'm going to borrow this from NAA or AA.
Mhm.
Everybody has the God of their own understanding,
That's right.
right? And so I always say that to people.
Mhm.
You can borrow this from the Christian religion. God is made in my image. Well, so
Right.
if you're a man, then you have a god. If you're a woman, you have a goddess. If you're trans, you have a trans god. Like
Right. Right.
that's who your higher power, source, creator, whatever you want to use
Right.
is, right?
Right.
I jaunted through the neo-paganism thing too, and so I picked up all the lingo, right?
Right.
But
Right.
at the end of the day, as a feminine presenting individual,
Right.
and who responds back to me when I got problems?
Right.
It's
Right.
the right? That's the one. And the other thing I wanted to bring up that you mentioned, which is a really good point, the goddess comes in so many disguises. She
Yeah.
is a master of disguise. In fact, she's the mistress of disguise. Let's just be
Yes.
1,000. She has
So I got to interrupt you to tell you about the Diamond Head God, because this is my whole thing that I've been talking about, and
okay,
I talk about it in like every episode in the second season,
perfect.
because I didn't talk about it in the first season. So I often refer to her as the Diamond Head God because I believe that all these phases that I've been through, different goddesses that I've worked with, different gods that I worked with, because when I was first Wiccan, I did work with other gods.
Right.
Um, and all those other gods and goddesses that various religions or people of different faiths all around the world, that it doesn't matter what you call it, whether it's Jesus or Buddha or Allah or
Correct.
Hecate or Diana or Artemis, that they are all facets
Facets.
of her. That's why I call her the Diamond Head God. That's
I
why the
believe that.
name of my podcast, which its tagline is in search of and in service to the divine feminine, right?
Right.
Because the girlfriend, right, both as a lover, partner, spouse,
Hmm.
and as a, you know, the girlfriend that you're going to talk smack about other people with, uh,
Correct.
or gossip
Lilith
with,
talks
or
about it too.
whatever. That got, that, hey, girlfriend, that's why that's the name of the podcast, the
I love
girlfriend
that.
God. So anyway,
No, I completely agree with you.
yeah.
Because as I became more goddess centric,
Hmm.
the range of goddesses that I had access to expanded.
Yes.
And I didn't even realize because I don't read almost anything mainstream related to spirituality. I
Right.
literally channel almost all of the information that I've gotten, or it's things that I picked up as a child from books. And so over time, my ability to work with multiple different goddesses, I
Hmm.
was like, there's a theme here.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
they're all the goddess. I was like, oh, I was like,
Hmm.
okay. And then someone came out with the goddess warrior training thing, and I was like, oh, I was like, I do that. And I kept moving, and I haven't read it yet. Still, I don't know how long it's been now. It's been almost like a decade. I haven't
Hmm.
read it because not because I don't feel like I could gain useful information from people, but
Hmm.
oftentimes, and I'm going to be okay with the arrogant way this is going to sound. Oftentimes, I read something and I'm like, I already knew that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like
Yeah, same.
I'm claircognizant, and so I get a lot of stuff from the spirit, a
Right.
lot. And I've always been called a know-it-all, and it's not that. It's that when you ask me a question, it activates basically the collective memory and the Akashic to just open up, and then they dump info.
Right,
So
right.
very rarely does someone bring something to me that I'm like, oh, that's brand new. No.
Right.
No,
Right,
there's
right,
almost nothing new under the sun. Now,
right.
what I do listen to people for is for like what you talked about, the diamond head goddess,
Right, right,
talking about the way that people's perspectives and understandings of the way a thing works,
right.
um, or just seeing it from a perspective that I don't normally see it from. That's what I listen to other people for because I need an outside viewpoint from my viewpoint.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
But at the root of the majority of the things that I find other people follow, I'm like, irrelevant.
Okay. So
Right.
tell me about shadow work without the goddess.
So, shadow work without the goddess is honestly a series of questions that you ask yourself, and then you're fearless enough to answer.
Okay.
Okay. And I understand why you said you needed the goddess to go to those dark places
Right.
because the level of trauma that the world has inflicted on people, especially people in feminine bodies, especially people who are not neurotypical, who are not heteronormative, right? Who are not constrained by binary gender concepts.
Hmm.
Like the amount of trauma inflicted on these individuals lends you to needing, you need backup to go face that ugliness. You need
Right.
backup, right? And I always say when you're doing shadow work, you have to set up a safe space for yourself to do it. So you
Right.
can, so it can be accomplished, because you're essentially re-traumatizing yourself in
Hmm.
order to heal yourself, right? So you're like pulling the scab off and you're like, oh,
Right. Right.
what's in there? And your spirituality, your faith, your um person of interest, if you'd like to say, is going to be the bedrock or the lidocaine around the scab, so that you can
Right.
rip
Right.
it off and only look at that section and not fall
Right.
into the abyss of everything that's harmed you,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that's one. The second thing is, I consider therapy to be shadow work if you actually communicate with your therapist and you
Yes.
have a
Yes.
therapist that's not attacking you or re-traumatizing you, who is trauma informed, who understands the nuances of your life, right? um
Right.
it's a form of shadow work, because you are now at a minimum recognizing your emotional state.
Right.
Our society does not allow for emotional states to be valid as of yet. We're getting to a more conscient, like people are like, oh, your emotions do matter and they cause a lot of problems. Yes, yes, duh.
Hmm.
Crimes of passion.
Right.
Hell.
Right. 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 But what's even more important than that is, why do you react the way you do? Right.
Correct. And the emotional body, most metaphysicians will tell you this, they know this. The emotional body reacts way faster than everything else.
Yes.
Everything else. And
Yes.
so the concept that your mind is running things, that's backwards as fuck. Like your emotions run things. And if you don't
Yes.
have an understanding of what is making up those emotions, where they're coming from, then you're
Right.
just a reactive mess. And people are out to get you. And everybody is against you. And you have a very polarized viewpoint of life. Everything is either this or that. And guess what? Life is not this or that. Life is a continuum of grays. Like
Right.
there's
Right.
a whole smorgasbords of in betweens. Okay.
Right. Right.
And I'm at the phase in my journey where I don't believe in good or evil. Like, are there things that are
Right.
truly evil? Yes. But you know who they are? Human.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the
Yeah.
end of the day, we ourselves as human are the most evil thing, because we're unwilling to recognize our own evilness, and we
Hmm.
are projecting it through the lens of Christianity and other Abrahamic religions, of this polarized concept of God and the devil, God and the devil, and you can always blame somebody else. No,
Right. Right.
you got to take accountability for the fact that we have tons of pedophiles in our world,
Right.
tons of them, and most of them are in your family. Okay, great. Let's have that chat. Because until you have that chat,
Right.
we're not going to have people who don't stop molesting people.
Right. Right.
We have to have that chat. And until you have that chat internally and you can face your own level of trauma related to that, and we can start looking at why sex is being demonized, why bodily autonomy is being reduced.
Right. Well, patriarchy. I'll just
But why the
throw that one
patriarchy,
word
right?
out. Right. Right.
Right.
How
So
did
so
we get
so
how
we
did
go
we get
back to the
there? How did
concept.
we get
So
there? Right.
correct. So we go back to the concept of the patriarchy. Why did the patriarchy even jettison into this point? Because the mother has always had the power.
Yep.
Always.
Yep.
And if we give children autonomy and if we give women autonomy, what does the patriarchy have to stand on?
Right. Exactly. So what about hmm, so as I think I mentioned, I mean, I did have some childhood trauma that I needed to look at, but I mean, I'm a very blessed person, and like true trauma, not to compare myself to, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to compare myself to others. I've been very fortunate. I've led a fairly charmed and easy, circumstantially easy life. Let me put it that way. Um,
Okay. But
but
you
the
still have
shadow
to deal
work,
with your identity.
I'm
crisis,
sorry.
right? You still had to deal with your identity situation. You don't have a heteronormative partnership.
That's true. And that was traumatizing. I mean, like I said, I turned 50. So if you do the math, I grew up gay in the 80s,
Which
which
wasn't
wasn't
fun at all.
easy. Right.
Right.
But the shadow work that brought me to my knees was really learning to accept and integrate the things about myself that I despised. Anything that even remotely smelled like self-recrimination, self-loathing, self-hatred, self-doubt, self-whatever, that was the shit that brought me to those very dark places. Which, I mean, you could argue that those things are a result of past trauma,
Well,
but
or even
but
this,
that but that was where
those
I
things are a
needed her.
result. Like, think about it. Those are the result of, let's just use your being gay in the 80s. That comes from being shown by others that being gay was not good enough, wasn't valid.
Right,
So then you hated the parts of you that wanted to be you.
right, right,
That's enough trauma, friend. It doesn't have to be deeper than that. And people
right,
really
right,
want to make it into so many worse things than it needs to be. It doesn't
right,
need to
right. I
be
get
worse
that.
than that, right? Like,
Right.
and it's interesting because when they look at studies of children who are in the same family and have traumatic events happen at the same
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
and the way one child internalizes it and one child absolutely doesn't, right?
Right,
Um, your perspective on it is 100% what makes it the trauma, right?
right,
And
right,
so was it traumatizing enough for you that you needed to do shadow work? Yeah.
right, right,
Yeah.
right, right,
Was your time span such that people were unwelcoming to who you were? Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
right.
You know, like my daughter is blessed to have grown up never needing to hide who she is from me.
Right,
Whereas
right. Hmm.
I only just came out to my parents like 3, 4 months ago.
Hmm. Okay.
Mind you, everybody on my social media knows, everybody in my real life knows,
Right,
but it was
right,
never something that, first off, I never felt like I needed to broadcast it because
right.
I'm an 80s baby. You're not sleeping with me. Why the fuck do you need to know what I do in my bedroom? That shit's weird. So that's just me. Like
Right,
I'm
right.
from the 80s. Like who I sleep with is my business, and why you're asking me about it is fucking weird and is your business. Like most, right?
Right, right,
So I never felt like I needed to step out of the closet because
right,
that was like I'm not really in a closet. This is just who I fuck. Like
right,
y'all are
right.
weird. But in order to stop these strange concepts of what was going to improve my life, my mom's, old school Christian. She's all like, "You got to get a good man." And I was like, "Look, lady, at this late stage of the game, I'm about to get divorced. I've had nothing but shit relationships with men thanks to your crappy tutelage as a parent. You know what's
Yeah,
gonna
I mean, oddly enough, for all the dysfunction in my family, uh, me being a lesbian has been the least of the problems between me and my parents. So,
you see? So that's you're right. You are blessed if that's the minimum.
yeah, yeah.
That's
That's always been, yeah, that's never really been an issue. But, Kimra, in my adulthood, I mean, as recently as the past, let's say 3 or 4 years, which I mean, that work with Hecate is as recent as the past 3 or 4 years.
well, she's been on a
Um,
she's been on a rampage the last couple of years, to be
yeah,
honest.
that's true.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll tell you, of the many goddesses that I worked with over the years, she was the one that made herself known the most. Like it
Mine
was
was
for
Lilith.
yeah,
No, mine was
like
Lilith.
we
Lilith.
I have an episode in the second season with Manette Chilson, and we're talking about Lilith and Eve. And my friend Carla, who has a podcast called The Goddess Project, has a really great episode about Lilith.
Oh, okay.
Um, anyway, so The things that I had to look at and what I really struggled with the most, and within the past 2 years, what I had to, I started thinking of it as bringing whatever I was struggling with, I bring it to the altar, right? Like I broke the habit of when I was struggling emotionally, my first instinct used to be to call a close friend and bitch and cry
Mm,
and blah blah blah. And I don't do that anymore. My instinct
yeah,
now, when I struggle, and I struggle rarely these days, that's the truth. But when
nice.
I was struggling then, by then I had learned how to, when I was disturbed in some way, shape, or form, I would take it to the altar and take it to the altar. I'm upset about something, I take it to the altar. I'm crying about something and I don't know why I'm crying, I took it to the altar. I'm fucking pissed
Hmm.
off about something and that person's driving me nuts, I took it to the altar. And through that process, I learned how to take everything to her first.
That's what I started doing too, honestly. But mine was for kind of a different reason. I had no one else. So I
Right.
spent 30 years in Florida, basically in a wasteland of no other practitioners, no honestly decent human beings except for like three, um, and no one to teach me anything. So I had to go to her to get anything. Like if I was
Right.
gonna survive this mess that was my life and the circumstances, and I ran into a lot of actual demons in Florida, which is fascinating. Like I know I said earlier that there's not actual evil things. There are, but there's a different way that that falls into the purview of spirituality, right?
Right,
And
right.
so um when I was taking on other people's demons and their health issues and their problems,
Hmm.
that's when I had to learn to stop going to people for help because I would go
Yeah.
to them for help and take their shit back with me.
Right.
So that was a fail for me, right? So at one point, I got burdened with
Right.
so much other people's stuff. I went and found um, damn, now I'm gonna mess up the word, a santero,
Okay. Okay.
and um, and I'm grateful, honestly. There have been four spiritualists that I've had to rely on in my life
Hmm.
to get me closer to the goddess, and I am fucking grateful for them.
Yeah.
One of them is a gentleman who I'm still friends with to this day. It's been like 20, 23 years. We've had some falling outs and we still come back and talk to each other.
Hmm.
Um, my ex best friend, who I had to fall out with before she passed away, but she's passed on. And now I know she's hanging out in the ethers checking on us.
Right.
Then my current mentor and bestie who taught me Reiki, fabulous human being, Melissa Hay too. She's out in Italy. Bomb distance Reiki healer.
Hmm. Hmm.
Bomb. Okay. And then the lady who put me into the priestesshood of Bastet in 2005, I don't even know where that woman is, to be honest. She was somewhere in Georgia. But she's the one that initiated me to the mysteries of the goddess from Egypt, which had been something I'd studied from childhood. So that was perfect. And these amalgamation of those four human beings, four angels in human flesh, I like to call them,
Yeah.
they are the ones that helped pulled me out of the abyss. That
Right.
was all of my generational trauma, my abuse, and all this other dumb crap that happened to me in my life, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so that's what allows me to be as clear and as focused as I am now. I'm
Right.
not going to say that I'm like the best person on the planet or the most successful person or the planet or the most knowledgeable person on the planet. I'm none of
Right.
the, right? Like the
Right.
more I know, the more I realize how little I know. Period. I'm
Right.
like
Right.
I'm dumb. Like whoa.
my 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 mantra is often, what the fuck do I know? I don't know.
Nothing.
Here's
Nothing.
here's what I think, but what do I know? I don't know.
Look, I will always tell people this is what I've learned in my experience. This may not hold water for you at all. You have to take what resonates and leave what does not. The
That's right.
end.
That's
And
right.
that's always my viewpoint on things. I
Right.
can only speak from the level of my experience and what has happened for me and what I have dealt with. Now, have I experienced and dealt with a lot. Sometimes I feel like more than other people, but it's for the express purpose of being of service now. Like
Right.
it's literally now. So
Right.
now I'm not a freshman on the boat. I'm a senior working on my PhD type thing in
Right. Right.
spirituality, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
11 years down the road, dude, I'm a damn doctor. Like, let's be honest.
Right. Right.
Not some shit that I started last week or 3 years ago.
Right. Right.
I have a vast amount of knowledge on a variety of topics. I don't know what to tell you, but it's only for the purpose of helping others. Like that's all I've figured out. Like after I like detailed all the crap that I knew, I'm like,
Right. Right.
only other people because otherwise it's just a box of useless knowledge. So
Right. I was
that's why.
listening not that long ago. I was listening to, I can't remember what his name was. Somebody I was watching on YouTube, and he said, any spiritual path that doesn't include being of service to others is destined to fail, or at least will have limitations, right? Will only take you so far.
It's only going to
I
take you
mean,
so far.
it's written into, I mean, we are wired for that in the same way that we are wired for connection with others.
Yeah,
That whole,
correct.
we really are all one. Like I believe wholeheartedly in
I
that.
believe that wholeheartedly. Yeah.
And Kimrâh, through this connection that I've always had, but that in the past few years I've really cultivated with the goddess, I gotta tell you, I worry about very little, and
I worry a
I
lot. Yeah.
rarely beat myself up for fucking anything. And that was the biggest shift for me
Yep.
because I learned how to take all that stuff to the altar when I was in the thick of it a couple years ago when we first moved back here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had shit come up for me I didn't even know I had. I had all kinds of guilt and shame about sex stuff and like kinks that I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested in, but I never tried to explore. I brought it all to her. And I had a fucking meltdown over a conflict I had with a friend. I ended a friendship I'd had for like 16 years. And
Mm-hmm.
it was hard and it was painful. And I found the goddess in Florence and the Machine, which is why I have a tattoo that has lyrics from Shake It
Right.
Out, which is I am done with my
Right.
graceless heart. Because not
Because
only
we
was
need
I
more
not
grace.
allowing grace into my heart, I was also not offering many people grace from
Right.
my heart.
Yep.
So, yeah. And since then, like I said, it has just gotten better and better and better and better. And I feel more free and I feel more like I'm living my authentic self than I ever have before.
Correct. Yeah, I'm the same. My decade of the 30s was a lot of stripping away of friendships and people and concepts of self that
Yeah.
were not me.
Right.
And
Right.
entering into my 40s, I have that pretty much nailed down. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
not me, this is me. That's not me, this is me.
Right.
And stuff
Right.
that's not me gets a hard fuck no. Like it's just I have
Right.
solid ass boundaries. My boundaries are my biggest celebration because I was a boundaryless fool forever. And
Right.
it hurt. Right now,
Yeah.
my boundaries allow me to move through even the most tragic events with grace and ease. And people look at me and they're like, how do you do it? And how do you look so good? And I'm like, this is inner work that you're watching. This has nothing to
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
honestly, with my physical vessel. My physical vessel is still very much ill.
Yeah, yeah. I feel
my
that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like my physical vessel is racked in pain most of the time. I'm suffering from mold illness. My daughter is too.
Mm,
Like that's the doctor's appointment I had that called me this morning. Um, so a lot of what I'm doing right now is reconstructing my physical body
yeah,
from the toll of the last 30 years of spiritual and physical and emotional abuse.
yeah.
Period. Now, do I look great doing it? Yeah, that's skills. because
Right, right.
that's skills because I have learn to just lean on the goddess for all things, like you were saying.
Yes.
And that's what allowed me to survive being traumatized in a hospital, and then literally pick up from that hospital and move 2,000 miles away to a place where I have really no place to set up shop, and then still find a way to set up shop and thrive.
Right. Right. Right.
You don't do that without practice, faith, and the
Right.
God moving you and you listening to how she moves you.
Right. Over the years, that voice in my head that I identify as hers has become crystal fucking clear.
Do you know that her voice is not separate for me at all? I can't hear her separate from who I am any longer. We've merged
Oh.
so
Oh.
smoothly at this point, that I can't, I don't even know how to explain it. All right, let me
So you hear her in your voice? I mean, it must be my voice because it's in English, right?
I love that for us, right? We're speaking to ourselves in English.
But it does sound, I don't know, there's something about it that sounds
Different.
different. Or maybe
Right.
it's just the way that it feels.
I I don't
Like
have
the
to say,
podcast is just a perfect example. That was a divinely inspired idea.
right.
I know sometimes when I have an idea that it clearly did not come from me.
Correct. Right.
It hits like a lightning bolt, and I'm like, okay, clearly this is a thing that she wants me to do.
So there's okay, so this is where once again I have to really be honest. The blurred line between my humanness and her divinity are almost non-existent at this phase because
Right,
I've
right.
had to rely on her so much for simple survival,
Okay.
just to survive the
Right,
things that I've been through, right? So, and because I'm also a channeler,
right.
and if you look at my astrology, I have I have a lot of my planets are in spiritual houses, and I'm a Scorpio. So I tend to live on the brink of the veil any damn way.
Right, right.
So for me, it's 4 breaths if I
Yeah,
want to. 4 breaths, and Kimrâh goes away and the goddess comes in.
yeah.
Full. I can't honestly hear her distinctly as separate from me because of that. It's
Right,
just a melting away of my humanness and
right,
allowing her divinity to rise up.
right.
And then she says what she has to say. Um, and how do I trigger her to be in that place? Like how you found that podcast. I was like, I get up every morning and I talk to the goddess while I'm showering, right? So I have a squad meeting when I shower.
Uh-huh.
I call all
A
my
squad
spirit guides.
meeting. I like
Yeah, I
that. I
call
like
my
that.
spirit guides and my ancestors and my angels and the
Yep, yep.
ETs and the galactics and the dragons. I'm like, squad, we're having a meeting, right? There's a fucking kerfuffle of them. There's a bunch. And
Uh-huh.
so we get in the shower together and have this squad meeting, and in the water touching me and running
Yeah.
through my body, and I'm connecting myself to the crystalline grid, which is why
Mhm.
it's fascinating that you said the diamond headed goddess. That makes sense because the crystalline grid of Gaia is that. It's
Right, right,
it's the multifaceted, multi crystal understanding of her network throughout the entire planet. And so
right,
by tapping into that every day,
right,
then I'm connected. Once I'm connected to her, I'm not closing the connections. So I
right,
don't have
right,
to hear an external, not really an external, but I don't have like a separation of her speaking. It's just like, beam me up, Scotty. It's just like drop, drop,
right, right,
drop,
right,
drop.
right,
And so, depending on my receptiveness and my openness, it will be a clearer drop or it'll be a muddier drop, right? But
right, right.
there's always a drop because I prefer to stay connected because being disconnected sucks. Like I just don't.
Oh my
This is
God.
like it's real simple. Like
I say this all the time. I only suffer when I go astray, you know?
legit, legit. Like if I find that I'm really like aggravated or anxious, or I'm like, I need to ground. I need to drop what's on me to the goddess, and then I need to draw her back into me to gain perspective.
Yeah.
And so that's part of my process. Part of my process is dropping what's bothering me, removing cords from daily interactions.
Right.
A lot of people don't do that. They don't do daily cord cuttings. I cut cords from my child. And people are
Yeah.
like, really? And I'm like, yes. Because I don't need to be taking on her emotional state. I don't need to be taking on her anxiety. She has her own shit to do.
Right.
Right. And that's poor empath etiquette also, to let people bleed all over you.
Right.
So when you're setting your boundaries, when you're setting up shielding, when you're setting up your grounding, you have to do this energetic maintenance. And it requires, like, if you know that you're a people pleaser, you know that you're an empath, you know you take on people's shit, when are you taking it off?
Right. Right.
Most people aren't. And they're like, why is my life a disaster? Well,
Right.
that's the
Right.
first thing I learned. I learned that my life was a disaster because I was in everybody else's business. I was in everybody else's energy. I was in everybody else's shit, and none of it was mine. And I was messing myself up. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't get anything done.
Right.
And then that was the shadow work. Oh, well, this is not me. Take it out. This is me. Keep it. This is not me. Take it
Right.
out.
Right.
Me. Keep it. And you have to start to learn to do that with your emotions. Not every
Right.
emotion that you have is yours. A lot of times it's the collective. And
Right.
I started to pay attention to that, I started to pay attention to when I would get attacked with feel like suicidal feelings. Suicidal feelings in the collective, the last 5 years has been at an
Mm.
all-time high.
Yeah.
And And if you're not aware that there is a separation between your emotions and the emotions of the collective, you're going to get swept up in that mess.
Right. Right.
You're going to end up in the hospital talking about, I want to kill myself.
Right.
And rightfully so. There's a lot of reasons to not want to be on this planet. Lots.
Right.
Okay. But you have to find why you're here.
Right.
And why you're here is what keeps me here. I'm here because
Right.
there are people who need my experience, who need to understand the things that I have learned through being stubborn and stupid, being a twat and an asshole to people, being hostile and ungrateful. Like all of those things. It's not like I was perfect and amazing to begin with. I was a shithead. Let's be real, right? I was a crappy mom when my kid was young. I was a horrible partner to my daughter's father. Like, I'm not perfect.
Right.
But have I strained to make myself better? Have I tried to do no harm as we were taught, on the way path? Right. Like, yeah, I have. Now, do I still practice spell work? For the most part, no. Like, just because I don't have to anymore. It's interesting. Like,
right.
once you clean up a lot of shit, you don't need as much spell work to accomplish things.
Right.
Which is great. And I have seen that progression with a lot of other witch practitioners in my life. They're like, yeah, I'm a witch, but I don't really do spell work anymore. I don't really need to. Right. I do a lot of law of attraction, gratitude. Like, gratitude will take you way farther than a spell.
I believe that.
Way farther. And then this other business of boundaries and cord cutting and knowing what is you and what is not you. Those are important. And that's why shadow work is important. So you can start to distinguish what is in your monkey mind that is actually you and what is like things your parents told you. What is things society told you? What is things your boyfriend or your girlfriend told you? Because we internalize all those things and they become our negative self-talk. And you have to strip that away and then start doing what I call, well, not what I call, but what is known as cognitive behavioral therapy. Start replacing those negative things with positive things until the bulk of what's circling in your mind is positivity about you.
Right.
Because then you can survive yourself. Otherwise, you're here hating yourself and hating others. And when you're hating yourself, you're disconnected.
Right. I was just talking to a friend about that. Actually, I have this conversation with a lot of people in my life a lot. Like, I don't know when that feedback loop started, right? Like the more I like me, the more I like you. The
Correct.
nicer I am to me, the nicer I am to you. And I don't know
Correct.
where it started, or maybe it was the nicer I am to you, the nicer I am to me. But it doesn't matter. It is a
Right.
feedback loop, and I just have to do my part, right?
So for me, I noticed that it was I treat everybody else so much better than I treat myself.
And
So
that's
I
like the fucking human condition. I mean, I could say that about
correct.
everybody I know.
Almost everybody. Right. And then what I realized was I need to treat myself at a bare minimum how I treat others.
Right.
Whoop. So when I
All
brought
right.
whoop, when I brought that
Man.
to myself and was like, would you let your friend say these things that you're saying to yourself? And I was like, fuck no. Well,
I say that to the people that I care for all the time. I take it off you and put it on me. Would you say that to me if I were doing what you're doing?
and
What's different?
that's when
What's
I
different?
gave myself grace. That's when
Right.
I learned to give myself grace. And
Grace.
then every day since then has been an exercise in learning to extend myself grace and then introduce boundaries because a lot of times I'm not giving myself grace because I'm resentful because I took on something that wasn't for me to take on.
Right.
And
I'm gonna
then I'm reactive and angry. Does that make
right.
sense?
It does. We've talked a lot about shadow work, what it is. We haven't really talked about what it isn't, but I think people that listen to this podcast have a kind of came in here already having at least a vague notion of what shadow work is. I always feel, on the one hand, I feel like, well, some things we need to explain for the benefit of listeners because maybe they don't know what we're talking about. And on the other hand, I'm like, yeah, but if they listen to this show, they
They should
probably
have
do know
some
what we're
basic
talking about. But
understanding.
still, I want to
Right.
like cover all my bases. So, um, yes, facing our trauma, facing uh, how do I want to say that? The less than admirable qualities of ourselves. Uh, for me, a lot of that was identifying where those traits originated from, which was usually in response to some sort of trauma. I had a friend who was a therapist, and she used to talk about big T trauma and little T trauma,
Right.
right? Like big T trauma, rape,
Like assault, sexual
assault,
assault, right.
yeah,
Attack, beating, and
little T trauma, somebody who's
just not giving you your
like
needs,
like
right? So like,
being raised by a narcissist.
but see, being raised by a narcissist
Well, that
more
kind
and
of is big
more
T
is
trauma,
a
but
big
but
T. Yeah, yeah,
but you
yeah.
get what I'm saying, right? Little
Right.
T trauma, just a little niggling from someone here and there and here and there and here and there versus
Constant
assault.
onslaught and assault. Right.
Right,
Like,
right.
so a lot of people can pinpoint the big T trauma, but shadow
Yes,
work helps you with the little T traumas, right?
yes,
Um,
yes.
like the things that we take on from our parents that really aren't us and don't serve us, right?
Right.
Like when you, I don't know, do you have children?
No.
Okay, well, congrats, number one. Number two, I have a child, and
Mhm.
when I heard my mom come out of my mouth, that was an awakening. That was like,
Yes.
ooh. I
Oh
said,
my God.
ooh,
Oh, I hate
ooh.
it. It still happens to me now. Still
Yep,
happens to me now.
right. You hear your mom say something, and you're like, lady, get out of my head.
Yep. Yep.
Right? So addressing those things, right? So if you
Yeah.
haven't had a life of harm and hurt and abuse and people taking advantage of you, first off, congratulations. I'm so
Yeah.
happy for you.
Yeah.
And I'm not being condescending. I
No,
am
no, I know.
genuinely grateful that you haven't had this level of fuck shit that I have. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. But there are still places where you can do shadow work to allow yourself to expand. Why?
Right.
Because, like
Right.
I said, shadow work allows you to find the inner goal that will help you thrive and really love your life. So,
Right.
oftentimes, this comes back into boundaries. Like, how can I be happier? Well, I have the tendency to overpromise my time because my mother was a Christian and she said that I had to be like God and do for others until there was nothing left for myself. That's not a big T trauma, okay?
Right, right,
But it's a very common little T trauma that majority women go through, and they're always excessively giving of themselves and not saving anything at all. So then
right.
they burn out and all of these things, right? So
Well, and that's a societal programming, right? I mean, so much of this shadow work is really
is
just about unlearning.
societal programming. The
Yeah.
bulk of it is. I'm going to be
Yes.
honest. The bulk of it is, and then you can add the added layers of abuse and trauma and all those things, right? So
Right,
that
right.
that gives you an extra package, right? Like I call it
Right.
the empath curse. I'm like, here's your empath curse package: sexual assault, people taking advantage of you, being robbed, domestic violence.
Right,
Like,
right.
yay! And a narcissist on a day. What the heck, right? so
Yeah, yeah.
so those that's how you have to look at it. There's If you find that you're not happy, or you find that you're resentful, or you find that you're not able to speak up and ask for what you need, that's a reason to do shadow work, because
Yeah.
there's a reason why you don't feel capable of expressing what you want. Like, remember,
Right.
you were talking about the kinks. You No one told you couldn't have the kinks, but you still didn't feel free to explore them, and you
Right,
didn't
right,
have partners who created safe containers for you to explore.
right,
So that's a level that people need to go into.
right,
I
right.
find it's extremely important to at least take a couple of kink tests to see if there is something that you might be interested in,
Right, right,
because sex is a continuum also. and if
right.
and if you can match your kink to someone else who can fill that void, then
Right,
you have
right.
less chance of screwing up your relationship. Okay.
Mm,
So all levels of things need to be taken into account when you're building the persona of you, your
right,
sexual health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. And shadow work will help you quantify where you stand in that. Like,
right,
if you wanted to break down all of these categories in areas of 1 through 10, on a level of 1 through 10, how much sex do I feel I need to be satisfied in a relationship? It's good to know these things.
right.
Relationships are ruined over not knowing these things. You have
Yep.
a partner who is maybe leaning towards asexuality, because we're only just talking about that now.
Right.
And so they don't feel the need to have relations. Well, if you have a partner who wants relations 3 times a day, baby, that's a fail.
Right,
And
right,
if everything else in their relationship matches, then you may end up having a cheater instead in a
right,
working relationship. And if it's not a conversation where they discuss the cheating, then you add in now a new level of like lack of safety, because the at
right,
home partner is now available to be exposed to whatever the external partner is bringing home, because they're cheating because they're not fulfilled,
right.
right? So like,
I'll tell you, Kimra, my wife and I have a very successful marriage, and we are the envy of some people, I assume. I don't know, maybe that's arrogant, but
no, I love it.
one of the reasons that we have such a successful marriage is because we are both equally invested and committed. And Cindy asked me when we first met and we first started dating, she said, I just need you to tell me that if we ever have problems, you're willing to go to couples counseling. And I said, absolutely. And you know what? We have had to do that, and we've had to do it more than once. But you know what?
Beautiful.
We're both committed.
And that's
We're
how you
both
get
committed.
things.
And
Right.
you know what? With every challenge that we have ever had in 13 years, it'll be 14 years this year, um, we have always come back stronger and more in love than we were before. So,
And look how intelligent and how discerning she was to start off and say, "Are you willing to go to couples therapy?" And then now here's the second part. You actually went when shit went to the dogs. Okay? Because
yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of people will say stuff in the beginning of a relationship that they don't actually mean.
We were both very committed to neither one of us repeating the patterns of our past.
Look, that's 97% of winning.
Yep. Because we'd both done enough work. We'd
Correct.
both done enough shadow work to know why we had the patterns that we had.
You
And
see?
we no longer wanted to fulfill them.
And
We
so
were
now,
not we were not a slave to those patterns because we knew ourselves well enough to know why. And we
exactly.
knew that we had a choice. We knew we had a choice. I
So
wasn't a
this is
slave to my past or my past decisions, and I also wasn't a slave to why I made those decisions that weren't in my self-interest.
and see, and that's the importance of shadow work right there. Because once you have started to see your patterns, address the patterns, then you can get ahead of them instead of being
Right,
attacked by them.
right. You
And
catch
then
them
you're not
earlier.
delusional. You're not delusional and you don't accidentally harm people through your own delusion,
Right,
right? Like I'm going through a divorce, so I'm not entertaining people right now. And I won't entertain people for at least maybe another 2 years, to be honest, so I can
mm,
unpack this relationship properly. And a lot of people don't take the time in between relationships to unpack them so that they don't repeat them.
right,
It's something that I've been talking about a lot this year, oddly enough, in the last like 3 or 4 months also. Um, but in between relationships, you have to sit down and go, what went wrong on my
right,
side and on that other person's sides? What red flags did I ignore? What things, how did I dishonor myself? A lot of people don't recognize that they don't honor their own choices. And by not honoring their own choices, they actually do a disservice to themselves and the person that they're in the relationship with.
right,
Because you're only going to breed resentment when you don't honor yourself.
right. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you talk about boundaries and red flags, but what I know is that I have to set boundaries. We talk about boundaries and red flags, but we always want to talk about that about as if it's about the other person. It's not. I need to know my own red flags and I need to set boundaries for me. For me.
For me.
I know that when I do this particular thing, like if I'm insecure in, I mean, obviously I'm not looking for romantic relationships, but I meet people and I make friends. And if
Mhm.
I find myself not wanting to talk about specific things, if I even find that my voice will have a slightly higher pitch in conversation with those people. If I
Mm,
see any sign of approval seeking or fear of rejection, that is a fucking red flag for me, my friend. And that
same.
means that something in that person is not safe for me. And doesn't mean we can't be friends, but it means I need to pay attention to how that friendship develops,
Correct. And
you know?
I need to pull back and assess how I am taking on whatever they have or whatever,
Right.
or how I'm
And that,
overextending myself.
right. And
Correct.
that pulling back is my boundary for me,
Correct.
not for
For
them.
me,
They have
not for
no idea what's going on in here, you
right.
know?
Right. Exactly. And for me, what I've also learned to do as I'm like understanding more about being neurodiverse and unpacking all of that mess, I have learned that narcissism and ADHD have a very similar love bombing stage.
Mm.
So I give, for the most part, all new friendships and relationships 90 days. It's an
Wow.
assessment period. It's a 90-day assessment period like they would at a job. Because after 90 days, my ADHD runs out of dopamine and I could give two fucks about you.
Wow.
So if you're really
I usually give new friendships a year. Wow.
no, you got
90
90
days. All
days
right.
because I'll find out the truth of how well we are going to interact when the dopamine runs out.
Right. Right.
Okay. And 90 days is all it takes. It happens at every damn job I've ever been in for the whole the whole of my life.
Nice.
So that's my pattern. I know that in
Right,
90
right.
days I will be able to assess the bulk of what I need to assess to decide whether or not we are going to continue forward. And at that point, I will tell you how we're moving forward.
Right.
And
Right.
I tell people that now going
Right.
in. I'll be like, hey, we're doing this thing and it seems to be working out great. And I love you so much. But we are going to reassess this every month until we know where we
Right.
stand.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And your reality and my reality bleed into each other and the real reality shows up.
Right.
This is a honeymoon phase. I've got real strong ADHD and I love people, but most people irritate my soul because I need a lot of alone time.
Right.
Right. So I have to be realistic about that. And I have to be realistic about my intensity
Right. Right.
and the other parts of my personality that are difficult for other people to deal with. Okay. I'm very much aware of the type of asshole that I am. I'm completely 1000% on board with
Mm.
the unsavory versions of me and why people don't like.
All right,
Absolutely.
Kimrah. So at the end of every show, I ask all the guests the same three questions.
Okay, I'm ready.
Are you ready?
I'm gonna
Don't worry,
fight.
they're fun. They're fun. Okay. Question number one. Tell me something about yourself that that people who know you would be surprised to learn.
What would they be surprised to learn about me? I don't know. I kind of let all my shit hang out.
I don't know. I was surprised to learn you live in fucking Florida for 30 years.
That was a fucking nightmare. Let's not even. I like to gloss over that shit. What would most people be surprised? They would be surprised to know maybe that I've been sexually assaulted multiple times in my life because I don't feel like I carry that. I don't carry my victimhood like a badge, I'm assuming.
Okay.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
there you go, making it fun.
I can't. I'm a Scorpio. Like we're always in the toilet or we're always in the depths of despair. Like it's like
Uh,
listen, one thing you'll notice about me that you don't know, I can't do small talk or surface level anything.
I
That's
know, I
shocking.
know, I know. It's just ending the show with a little
Levity,
levity.
you can't
That's
even
all.
do it.
All right, all right. So, question two: what is your current favorite TV show or movie?
Hmm. Well, I've actually watched several recently because I'm kind of sick, so I lamp a lot in front of the Netflix.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I just watched a show called Diablero.
What is it called?
Diablero. Diablero. So
Okay,
it's I want to say it's a Mexican show. I'm definitely watching it subtitled in another language. Um, but I think you can get it without the subtitles in another language on Netflix. But I really like that show because it's about demons
okay.
and um the accuracy with which they portray the corruption of the Catholic Church
Mm.
really just gives me the warm and fuzzies.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that it's a great show. It's got a lot of relevant occult references too that I'm like, okay, they're not completely pulling this out of the Hollywood bullshit box, right? So,
Funny you should say that because Kendall and Carla, my occasional co-hosts,
mm,
there's an episode that we're doing for season two about that very thing, about where they've gotten it wrong in retellings of mythology
so many.
in popular culture, because there's so many, exactly. Okay, so
Hold on.
final question. Uh, what would be the theme song to the soundtrack of your life?
Honestly, although I want to laughingly say, I'm still alive. I'm still alive. That's not it. It's the actual soundtrack is a song called You by Petite Biscuit. And
Okay,
it's my it's the song that brings me home to me.
okay,
No matter where I am, no matter how angry I am, no matter how ungrounded or off center, I'm on the spectrum. And so I use music a lot to
hmm hmm
make my brain do what I need it to do.
right,
And if I am, let me rephrase this, the way that I'm able to navigate traumatic events without staying in the trauma and without internalizing it as much is because I've created the ability to use this one song to not only shield me from things, but to remind me that I am not my trauma. I am who I am. I'm Kimrâh. I'm in service to the goddess, and the goddess is always with me. Right? And so
Yeah.
that's my touch point, my tether.
Yeah.
So I don't lose. And that song hasn't changed in the last, when did I get this song? Oh, I think it's been about 7 years.
Yeah.
And still has the efficacy to snap me back into who I am.
Right.
I thought that I might be shifting to a new song over the last 6 months. I was like, have we upgraded? And then not like in a bad way, right?
Right.
But then it was like, no, this is the core of who you are. And I was like, okay. I said, okay. And so that's my song. It's You by Petite Biscuit. And one of the things that I've noticed, this is a law of attraction thing.
Mm-hmm.
When I picked that song and started playing it repeatedly to wrap myself in this like melodic cocoon of self, that song then became extremely popular in advertisings, and I was like, I hear it everywhere. And now it's pretty like regular mainstream. I've seen it on a couple of Netflix shows, and I'm like,
right.
Like nice. So that's my song.
All right. Well, thank you, Kimrâh.
Thanks for
being yet another person who I reached out to as a complete stranger and was like, hey, I'm Kelly. I have this podcast. This is what it's about. You want to come on the show? And you were like, sure.
Sure, why not?
It amazes me every time that happens. Every time that happens since I started. I'm like, and people are always willing. And I thank the goddess for that, right? Because I'm drawn to the right people at the right time, and they are open.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say that on this path, I have found that the people I'm meant to meet are always available to me because I'm supposed to, right? So when someone reaches out to me, I'm like, the goddess has work for us to do.
Right.
That's it. Everything to me, like you were saying, is what the goddess has asked me to do in service. Like, how am I in Fitchburg, the middle of nowhere of Massachusetts, one of the coldest parts of the state, which I'm from sunny Florida. I'm crying.
Right.
I'm Haitian. I'm a Caribbean girl. Like, where's my island and my water?
Right.
There is a need here, and there's an opportunity for me to be in service to others.
All right. Well, again, Kimrâh, thank you very much. And as I say to all of my guests at the end of the episode, may the blessings and the love of the goddess be with you.
Thank you. I received that and hope the same for you. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching or listening. If you want more of The Girlfriend God, you can find The Girlfriend God and The Girlfriend God Podcast on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. The Girlfriend